Welcome to the show, Bogut.
Thanks for having me, man.
No, it's an absolute pleasure to have you on the program. And I think congratulations is in order for your victory over the Bayside Conservation Society. How long were you fighting that battle?
Yeah, about 2 years all up, really, from start to finish, which was, involving talking to councillors and politicians, actually having a meeting with the Conservation Society themselves via Zoom, trying to at least come to some middle ground. But they're militant with their views and ended up, they heavily sway council, which is disappointing. So the council then knocked the permit back, which their own planning department approved, funnily enough.
Yeah.
And then we had to go to the final step of saying, screw you, we're going to VCAT, and VCAT had some common sense about it and granted the bill.
Yeah, and for our audience members who may not know the backstory, this was effectively about building a mansion on Beach Road in Melbourne's Bayside suburb of Beaumaris, and some of the objections that the Conservation Society had have to do with things like the size of the basement, the height of the fence, and I guess this just all speaks volumes about the rule-based society that we find ourselves in here in Australia.
Yeah, but it's not even rule-based. Some of the objections were just downright ridiculous. It was too much soil removal for the basement. It was basketball court will make noise from ball bouncing. It was it could potentially be an Airbnb holiday. It was just outrageous. And the fact that the hypocrisy of it all, and what makes it even funnier is that it's my ratepayer money taking me to court. So it's just, we're over legislated in Australia, as we all know, but everyone's scared to talk about it. It's like, oh yeah, council screw everyone over, it's the norm, let's get on with it. But my whole point is why that shouldn't be the normal. Everyday people are greatly affected by this. I could afford to fight it and punch back, but most people, and that's what I learned through this process, was it wasn't so much about my story and trying to stick one up the Conservation Society. That was about 10 or 15% of it. But the story I wanted to tell was this affects a lot of everyday people who don't have a voice. And if you don't have a social media presence or a media presence or a personality like a sports person or whatever, no one hears, your cries for help. And I've heard horror stories about, I did it on my podcast. There was a family that purchased a home with the mind to eventually renovate it. They purchased a home that was run down. They thought, we'll live in it for 5 odd years and then either knock it down, start again, or renovate it. And then halfway through their ownership, it got deemed heritage, halfway through their ownership. So these people had done their due diligence and checked with the lawyers before they bought it. It wasn't heritage, great. And then halfway through, it's heritage. It's just and then this cost these people $200,000-$300,000 to fight that. By the time they fought it, they had no money left to renovate their home, which is just downright criminal.
Yeah. And that's something that you've been really vocal about throughout the pandemic as well, just being a voice for the working class and socioeconomic groups who perhaps were disproportionately affected by the lockdowns. And that's something that we'll get into later today as well. But one final point on building. My background is Macedonian, so from the former Yugoslavia. And of course, people from that part of the world, buying property, investing, redeveloping is a big part of, it's in the blood. And about 8 years ago, I went through a similar experience building 3 townhouses, as you do in Yarraville. There were objections from the council about maintaining the look and feel of the street, which I understand. But that particular instance, it took about 6 months longer than it should have to get approvals. Fast forward about 7-8 years, and half the street's been redeveloped into townhouses. So there you go. It's just delaying the inevitable in some cases. But let's take a step back. People will know you as one of Australia's, I suppose, most accomplished, or one of the most accomplished basketball exports. You spent about 15 years in the NBA, won a title with the Golden State Warriors. At the peak of your powers, you were getting about 16 points, 10 rebounds a game. You represented the Boomers at 3 separate Olympics. But the origin story of Andrew Bogut. So you grew up in Melbourne. You were born in Melbourne, but which suburb did you grow up in?
I was born in Mulgrave. Early childhood was Dandenong, and then we moved to Endeavour Hills, which was kind of an aspirational suburb coming from Dandenong, because it was a new development, kind of new and shiny. And then we moved to Endeavour Hills. We were one of the first lots around that area, and then spent the rest of my childhood there. So, but ended up going to high school in Dandenong. So I was basically Dandenong / Endeavour Hills all throughout growing up.
So Dandenong, obviously a very multicultural area, former Yugoslavia, Croatians, Serbians, Albanians, all sorts of ethnicities, bit of a melting pot there. And your folks moved out from Croatia back in the 70s, right? And what did the folks do growing up?
Yeah, so they moved in the 70s, and they met in Melbourne, at the local WOG club. I think it was the Croatian hall out in the west somewhere. I think it was
Footscray.
Yeah, it was Footscray. But they used to have dances at random places in Preston and halls and stuff.
Right.
They didn't have back then. They didn't really have a base that was constant. They'd move stuff around sometimes, but they could hire venues.
Mm-hmm.
And then my dad was, dropped out of high school early. The usual story, like bullied, didn't speak English well, beat the shit out of everyone that messed with him, and actually punched out his PE teacher for calling him a wog, and then went to the principal's office, got called a wog again, punched his principal, and that was it for school for him. So ended up being a labourer at or a factory worker at 15, 16, and then ended up starting his own business. He was a big car nut, and
like yourself.
Yeah, just not as I'm definitely not as much as he was. He's much more qualified, and he gets on the.
Did you have a prized possession, folks?
Yeah. Me?
No, did your dad have a prized possession?
Yeah, he had an XP when he was young. He had numerous cars, but funny story. He had an XP when he was. I think it was might have even been earlier, XT maybe, or later. Sorry, but yeah, he smashed it into a bunch of parked cars as a young fella. Yeah. And ended up going to Pentridge.
Was that intentional?
What's that?
Was that intentional?
No, he accidental. He hung it around a corner trying to be smart ass, just put the tires up and hit parked cars. Back then, he got 5 days Pentridge for that. He was in jail for that. But anyway, he ended up, because of his passion for cars, he ended up being a carburetor and fuel injection specialist. And that's kind of where he applied his trade. My mum ended up then working for him and being the logistical part of the business, where she'd go to Ultra Tune and, those chains. They had no idea about doing carburetors. My mum would drive out there. They'd strip the carburetor off the car. She'd bring it back to my dad to the workshop. He'd refurbish the whole thing like brand new. She'd drop it back off to him, and they'd charge a fee for all that. So that's kind of how, our family made a living.
Yeah. So the background is obviously, working class family, immigrant family, growing up in a multicultural part of town. Now, obviously, you went off to play basketball, but did you always want to be a basketballer growing up back in those early teen years, or?
Yeah, teen years for sure. Early on, I just wanted to play sport. I played a lot of different sports as a kid. Loved AFL as well as a young fella. So like 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 was all that AFL. Did Vic Kick when it was called Vic Kick still, and all those fun things. But basketball kind of came on later on. It was like 8, 9, or 10. Started organised, and then it just grew from there. But I always kind of wanted to be a professional. But, everyone and their dog tells you you're never going to be a professional, because the percentages are so small. So your teachers and people around you are like, you're crazy. You need to don't worry about sport. You never make it, blah, blah, blah. And I always kind of had a dream to make it. And for me, it wasn't really the NBA. It was more just playing professionally anywhere in the world, whether it be the NBL or overseas. And just making money from playing sport to me was mind-boggling that was even a thing back then when I was a kid, right?
Yeah, no, and I grew up in the same generation as you. I think you're a year younger than me, and I remember growing up, pretending to be Charles Barkley or Larry Johnson or one of those guys from the early '90s playing basketball. I grew to 5'8", so I don't think I was ever going to be the Wog Muggsy Bogues mate. But for many of my mates, rather, we playing in the NBA, that was only ever a fantasy, right? But for yourself, obviously, that fantasy became a reality. Now, at what age did you think to yourself, wow, I might actually have a shot at making it in the big leagues?
Oh, the NBA it came on just late for me. So I developed really late, and probably, I was getting cut from teams still at 14, 15, as I kind of my family hired a personal basketball trainer that I did extra work outside of my club.
Just from former Yugoslavia, right?
Yeah, half Serbian, half Croatian. So good mix. But yeah, he was influential in my development as a young fella, and we literally just put more time in than anyone else, and got my coordination right. I was very kind of tall and skinny and somewhat uncoordinated at times, so it was more about getting your footwork and growing into your body, because I was just growing so fast that you're trying to catch up, and arms and limbs kind of everywhere, and then just it came on so quick. So then 16, 17, I go to the AIS, go there for a couple of years, Still didn't think NBA was achievable. I thought, shit, Europe would be great. Like make money over there, go play over there, or even the NBL still. Go to the University of Utah. And then after my, freshman year, had a really good year. Averaged 13 and 10 my first year there. Then went to the Olympics in 2004 as a 19-year-old. And that's when I realized, like, okay, I've got a chance to compete with these guys, because I had a really good Olympics against grown men and NBA players. Yeah, that was probably when I realized I had a genuine shot. So, and then within a year I was in the NBA. So it wasn't one of those instances where I knew at like 14, 15, it all just kind of within a 2-year period, it just went bang. And then I'm looking back behind me, and Australia's in the rearview mirror, and I'm the number one pick in the NBA draft.
Yeah. So number one pick in the NBA draft, and circling back to doing that work with the guy who was half Serbian, half Croatian. Sorry, what was his name?
Siniša.
So that was effectively on the back of you being cut from the Victoria Junior State Representatives, right, at the age of about 15. I mean, how did that experience of being cut, shape the way you approach the game and shape your work ethic, thereafter?
Yeah, look, we hired him a little bit before that. It was a couple months before that. My old man ran into him randomly at a basketball game. I was playing. My dad was in the crowd. He sat next to my dad. Said, "Is that your son?" He said, "Yeah." He goes, "I could make him a player." And my dad was like, "Okay, well, let's do it. Like, do you train players?" He's like, "No, I don't have time. I can't do it." He's like, "Well, put your money where your mouth is. And if you're going to talk that shit, like, back it up." "No, I don't have time." So they exchanged details. And then later that night, he called and took up the offer. And basically, he got paid pretty good money to do that. But back then, my dad was paying a lot of money to him. But yeah, then I tried out for the Vic State team under 18s. Look, I got cut earlier from different rep teams. So like 14, under 16, got cut from Dandenong, got put like the third team, went to Waverley, and then ended up at Sandringham, but tried out for that state team under 18s. And I got cut, but the beauty of it was I got an emergency spot. So what that meant was the way state championships work, I think the championships were in July of that year. And then we started, the tryouts started, I think, in January, February, and then you do training sessions every Saturday and Sunday leading up to the championships. But by becoming emergency, it meant that if someone got hurt along the way, you'd take their spot, but you got to train with the team the whole time. And what was beautiful about that was as I started getting better and better, by the time they went off to the championships, obviously no one got hurt. By the time they went to the championships, I was probably one of the best, if not the best player on the team, but I couldn't go because it was an emergency. So it really made me appreciate how much work I'd put in, but also gave me the opportunity every weekend to go and try to, because those guys had made the team, so they had there was a bit of relaxation about them. Like, I've made the team. Let me just get through the training sessions. And I was that asshole kid that I wasn't in the team, but I was coming for your neck every Saturday and Sunday. Whereas the kids that had made it are like, dude, this dude just, what's he doing? He's coming, killing us. Like, he's going after us. He's physical. He's in our face at training. And that was the beautiful thing about it. And then, the rest was history as far as Australia went after that. But I wouldn't change it for the world. I think, having those moments of adversity make you what you are later on in life.
Oh, definitely. And obviously you had a lot of moments of adversity through your NBA career with the, injury setbacks and whatnot that you enjoyed. But seems like, young in life, you learned the value of persistence and hard work as well. That kind of got you through those setbacks with the junior teams. We always hear these stories of people like Larry Bird, who used to shoot, 500 free throws allegedly before he went off to a day at high school. So he'd shoot those 500 free throws in the morning. Did you have any routines like that to stay on top of your game as a young kid?
Nothing like that. I was just out. Whenever it wasn't raining, I was outside in the backyard. I had a little court in the backyard that my dad made out of pavers, and went and got shade mesh from the hardware store. And it was like, 10, 15 feet high shade mesh to put it along the fence so the ball wouldn't go over the fence. Like, neighbors were livid and whatnot. But I'd go outside as much as I could. But once it ramped up to being more organized when I was 15, 16, it was like I was training a lot. It was 2 sessions a week before school at 6 a.m. on Mondays and Wednesdays. Every day I had, a session right after school. My senior would pick me up. He'd be waiting outside the school in his car. I'd jump in the car, go and train. Then on top of that, I'd have, 2 or 3 club training sessions a week. Then there's obviously domestic teams, state teams. So it was a lot of time, a lot of driving around Melbourne to different training venues. But where once that all got started, it wasn't a set routine like Larry Bird, but it was just a lot of time on your feet on a basketball court. And it was 20, 25, 30 hours some weeks on top of school and all that stuff.
Yeah, so you would have obviously learned the value of like discipline and making sure you manage your time well, given school, basketball, and trying to maintain some semblance of social life too, I imagine.
Yeah, the social life took a backseat, to be honest with you. Like I didn't,
Yep.
I wasn't a kid that could afford to go to parties. I go every now and then, but it just, with rep teams in Victoria or Melbourne or Australia, usually train Sunday morning. So if you have a rough Saturday night, hungover or whatever, like, stupid kids do at 16, 17, you're not training well. So I always had something in the mornings on Saturdays and Sundays. So I couldn't afford to be out and about with the guys causing trouble. And I think it's a good thing. I think even if I didn't make it in basketball, I think it set me on the right path to not get involved, in the wrong crowds. I had a lot of friends and people in school that were partying Fridays and Saturdays that would end up getting in trouble. They'd be involved with gangs and all that kind of stuff, be in trouble with the law. So it kind of helped me avoid all that kind of stuff.
Yeah. What about when you got over to, say, the University of Utah and, we hear all these stories from this side of the world about fraternities and all that sort of stuff and the craziness. And we do hear, stories of high potential athletes who just got caught up with the partying and the drugs and everything else that they can access when they're playing college basketball. I imagine you took that same sort of attitude with you there, or?
Yeah, and that's the reason why I chose University of Utah, to be honest with you.
Mhm.
My parents and I were very comfortable with going to Salt Lake City. It's a very family-orientated city. It's a Mormon state, so people knock the Mormons and make fun of them, but they're very good people. They're very family-orientated. They have good values. So I knew if I'm going to college and to limit distraction, if I went to UCLA or California school or a big New York school, like I'm going to get caught up with partying and all that kind of stuff. And don't get me wrong, the University of Utah, you want to find a party and you want to find bad things to get into, you can find it anywhere, right?
Yeah.
I experienced it a little bit, but generally the beauty of Utah was everything used to close at 1 a.m. or 1:30 in the morning. So you'd be home early anyway compared to Australia.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, it just was a perfect city for me to focus on, what I was there for. And I knew I just needed to suck up that 2 years and really dedicate myself to get to, the next step.
Yeah. Yeah. And, earlier in our conversation, you basically said, people thought you were crazy to, pursue a professional basketball career. You'll never make it. The chances are so small. But it sounds like, from what I'm hearing, your parents played a very sort of active role in supporting you on that journey rather than discouraging you and telling you to go off and be an accountant or a lawyer.
Yeah, look, for most kids that make it in sport, or even just junior sport that don't make it, if your parents aren't driving you around and putting effort in, you're really behind the eight ball. Like I knew kids that I played with a kid that his parents barely spoke English. They didn't have their license. They migrated from, I think, Turkey. And this poor kid used to have to catch a train to all our games and training sessions and be late sometimes. And that's really tough. So if you have the support of your parents and they can obviously afford to be able to leave work early if they work for themselves, that flexibility helps. And yeah, just having them be able to drive you around. It's expensive as well these days. Basketball shoes, bags, equipment, gear. You get hurt, you might have to go to physio. Training sessions. Our trainer back then was making $50 an hour cash. So if it was a 2-hour session, it's $100 5 times a week. For a guy running his own business, $500 a week is a lot of money. So yeah, just one of those things that you gotta have that kind of support to try and get yourself to the next step. But look, it is achievable without it. There's a lot of kids that have made it without it, but you're definitely on the right path if you've got that parental support.
Yeah, definitely. And making it over to Utah, did you suffer from a bit of culture shock initially? How did you navigate those cultural differences from growing up, say, in Dandenong to being on a team with a bunch of guys who perhaps grew up in the inner city somewhere in the States?
Yeah, look, the first part of it was going to the AIS. So leaving Melbourne and going to the AIS and living amongst your teammates and just coming from a Croatian household where there was a lot of home cooked meals, very good food, as Sunday morning. Yeah, Sunday mornings you go to the deli and get a French stick and a bunch of salamis and cheeses, and that would be. And so then getting to AIS was a culture shock because I was then eating bland everyday food that was catered towards most athletes there had to maintain or lose weight except for the basketball program. So it was like very hard to get nice hearty meals. That was a shock. We had there was a Serbian guy and a Macedonian guy on the team that we hung out a lot together, and that kind of stemmed the flow a little bit, but that prepared me for the homesickness a little bit. But then I thought, I'm good. I've been away from home for 2 years at the AS. I'll be fine. But then when you get to Utah, what you forget is that, the time difference. So when you want to speak to your family, they might be asleep or vice versa. Our schedule was very busy with classes and then training and then this and that. So, and back then it was, you had to mortgage your house to make an international phone call. It was so expensive, man. Like,
yeah, I remember.
it was $5-6 a minute or some shit. And for a kid that didn't have a coin in his pocket back then, it was like every now and then the coaches used to let me sneak into their offices and make a call, which was deemed illegal by NCAA, but they let me make a call home for a couple of minutes on their actual phones from their office. But yeah, it definitely hit some homesick periods. Had a very tough coach my freshman year as well, which didn't help. So, but like we said earlier, I mean, all those moments of adversity make you who you are and get you to the next stage.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And I think it's something that perhaps we're forgetting in today's sort of society, or at least a lot of people are forgetting. They think adversity is a bad thing, and we need to coddle people and make sure that their path is as easy as possible. But when you do that, you don't learn the big lessons. And then when life gets tough, as it inevitably does, you kind of cower in a corner and you don't push through.
Yeah, and it's adversity and even failure. Like failures.
Yeah.
I do, some public speaking gigs, and I always hit when people want me to do kind of /motivational /storytelling. I always touch on failure, right? And it's the most taboo word around people in business, sporting people in university. Oh, you failed. I think it's a very useful tool. Like if used in the right way, can project you to the next step, because it's brutally honest. Like failure isn't politically correct. It isn't gonna tell you what you want to hear. It isn't your friend saying, "Oh no, that's okay. That you'll be fine." It's like, no, you sucked in this moment.
Yeah.
Now you need to go to the drawing board and reassess. There's only two ways you can go after failure. You can quit and not do it again, or you can actually sit down, get a whiteboard, a piece of paper, and be like, okay, this is all the things that I did leading up to this event or this business meeting or this investment. Where did I screw it up along the line? And that's how you learn. And the next time, you hopefully don't fail. You get 50% better and up. But yeah, you're right. I mean, society's in a different phase of I guess the world is in a different phase where we, don't want kids to fail or make a mistake. We don't want people to have adversity or have a bit of conflict and back and forth. And you need those kind of things to excel in whatever walk of life you're trying to progress through.
Definitely. And, I do a lot of work with early stage startups. And one thing that gets parroted a lot is Customato's quote. He was Mike Tyson's trainer. Everyone has a plan until they get punched in the face. And, failure is something that is absolutely necessary to learning what you need to learn about, your customers, your business model, how much they're willing to pay for something and so on. And if you're not willing to hear the word no, well, then you're probably not going to hear the word yes. But on the cultural differences between Australia and the US, obviously, a lot of these concepts like coddling kids have, stemmed from the US in some part, but still going back to say 2005, when you made your way over there, would you say that the risk appetite amongst Americans, it seems like they have a much greater risk appetite and much more tolerance for failure than we do here in Australia?
Yeah, no, I mean, I feel like we're very similar in that aspect. Like the trends follow each other. I think we're 3 or 4 years behind what the US usually does, maybe 2 years. That goes for everything, fashion, what's trending, what's not. So look, everywhere you're going to have those issues, but I saw some similarities there. But usually the kids it all depends. I think social media has really changed things in the last 10 years. I think getting gratification from people that you don't know or trying to make people you don't know jealous about the life you're living has really altered the way kids think about themselves and what they do. And that's what we're seeing in Australia. We see that in the US as well. So I think the trends kind of intertwine over a period of time. But, it's all circumstantial. It's all product of upbringing, what life they've lived, what their experiences are, what state they're living in the US. That's a big determining factor, which I think
is like different countries.
Yeah, but we're starting to learn that here in Australia. Like different states now are with our premiers and whatnot, different kind of priorities with things. So yeah, there's a lot of different factors, but for the most part, I think it's pretty similar. Yeah,
fair enough. So a couple final questions on basketball, and then we'll move on to explore some other topics. But if basketball didn't work out, Bergs, what do you think you would have done?
Would have been digging holes, mate, filling concrete or something. I would have been. that was the thing. I didn't have a pivot.
A backup plan. But in a way, that kind of made you more motivated to succeed, right?
Yeah, that would be my point. Like, I think when you're older, you want a backup plan. But there's also that argument of like, if you have a backup plan for something that you're heavily vested in, you're not as heavily vested as you think. So there's pros and cons to both ways. I mean, I've heard people do it either way and succeed. But yeah, man, I was kind of all into that. I didn't really think about anything else. I'm like professional basketball. And like I said, if it was just in the NBL for $100,000 a year, I was more than happy with that. So it would have been, whatever I would have done, I would have put all my effort and energy into beyond basketball. I was just in a unique situation to do something that I love. Like, not many people get to say they get to play not only a game or a sport, but something that they love doing and getting paid a shitload of money for. So I didn't have an out. But to answer your question, I would have been probably some sort of laborer. I would have had to have sucked it up and learned a bit more from my dad and taken over his business. Who knows what direction it would have been, but it would have been something that my dad heavily advised against. Do not, either go to school and study or play sports. Don't do a job that's kind of laborious and where you're breaking your body up for minuscule pay. And he had a fair point.
Yeah. No, definitely. And it's funny what you say. Obviously there are two schools of thought. Having a safety net can be good, but also not having a plan B kind of means you go all in with that first, with your plan A effectively. And, you've heard a lot of stories about, one name that comes to mind is Rick Allen, who was a drummer for Def Leppard, and he had his arm torn off in a car accident, but he didn't have a plan B. He was like, man, I want to keep playing with this band. So he basically taught himself to play with one arm, completely reinvented how he played the drums. And 30 years later, he's still playing stadiums with that band. So it's funny how galvanizing it can be, not having that plan B. So you obviously spent your last year playing basketball with the Sydney Kings in the NBL. Won the league MVP, made it to the grand final. How have you been spending your time away from the game? Because you've been out of it for over a year now, roughly.
Yeah, a year and a half. Yeah, look, I mean, it's been an adjustment. It's just been, I retired right upon the COVID stuff coming out. So 2020, I officially retired probably about a year ago. Yeah, right. So, but I kind of always had in the back of my mind, as soon as they announced the Olympics were going to be delayed, I was like, I'm done. I just didn't announce it for 2 or 3 months. But yeah, look, it's been weird just because I haven't been able to transition to the exact, I wanted to really, do the podcast stuff more with video and all that kind of stuff. And really got some interesting people lined up to talk to and have been talking to them. But I want to set up a proper studio for it, do all that, but everything's just been thrown out of the works. Just haven't had the time to be able to do all that stuff because of the restrictions and borders closing and opening and this and that. Yeah. So it's been weird, just being kind of treading water right now. But the beauty of it's been able to be at home with the kids a whole lot more, seeing them on a daily basis was something I wasn't able to do. They're 3 and 5 now, but I wasn't able to do for the first couple of years of their life was be around this much. So even at the start of being home a lot, the kids were even like, what the hell are you doing here so much, So that's been good. But yeah, it's just I guess the toughest thing for professional athletes is we're so regimented every day. Essentially my life since I was 14, 15 has been regimented around basketball. So everything's been about me, whether it's getting a nap at a certain time, bedtime at this time, meal at this time, everything was me. Once you retire, you got to realize that it kind of does change a lot. You got to be much more flexible. And that's probably the hardest thing to figure out, and why a lot of athletes struggle. And I'm not going to lie, it's been a struggle some days, like where you're home and you're just so used to being, bantering with the guys in the locker room, or a competitive fire that you've now lost that you're not really exerting. So it can kind of affect you in the other way around your wife and kids at times. You just got to be cognizant of it. But I'm not going to lie, there's been days where, your wife has to pull you up and be like, you're all right. Sometimes you take a deep breath and realize that, you got to get on with it.
Yeah. Well, that is, like you said, from the age of 14, you're 36 now, almost 37. That's a good, almost quarter of a century where you had this, regimented lifestyle, and now you don't. So I imagine it's a huge adjustment. So I'm sure you'll power through it slowly but surely. So one thing that you've been quite vocal, obviously on Twitter, in the media, on various political matters, whether it's the pandemic, whether it's dealing with councils and whatnot. And one thing you do discuss, you mentioned your podcast, the Rogue Bogues podcast. Everyone should check it out. We'll have a link in the show notes. You talk about basketball, you talk about cars, you talk about politics. You had the guys from Sushi Mango on there, which was a hilarious episode. Now, speaking of politics, perhaps we'll marry your two worlds, politics and the NBA. Enes Kanter, he's obviously been, the Boston Celtics player. He's obviously been very vocal, speaking out against the Chinese Communist Party with respect to, Hong Kong, with respect to the Uyghur genocide, which I think takes a lot of courage, given how much money that China pumps into the NBA, about 10% of revenue, which is about $800 million a year. And also given the fact that, things have happened in the past where players, general managers and whatnot have effectively been silenced. I mean, what do you make of Enes Kanter and his sort of ongoing tirade against the CCP?
Yeah, I think he's going to be out of the league in a year or two, I think. He's obviously taken a big stand and just continuing. He had the shoes painted for Free Hong Kong and all that kind of stuff. Look, the NBA promotes. We love athletes speaking about political issues, but it seems like this one's not one that they want him speaking about. So you can't have it both ways. You want to be able to have players share their thoughts politically and socially and all that kind of stuff. It can't always be just acceptable if it's mainstream. But the NBA hasn't promoted him at all. They haven't put him up in the forefront because money's at stake, and it's the elephant in the room in the NBA. It's the elephant in the room that China, there's a lot of players that hashtag equality tweets, all this kind of stuff that are blatantly silent about what's going on in China because they've got shoe deals and marketing deals. And a lot of players go over there in the off season and make a shitload of money doing camps. And there's a bit of hypocrisy in that. And I agree with it. I think if you're going to speak up for human rights violations and people and equality and minorities, you need to do it on a grand scale once you've opened that can of worms. You can't pick and choose. And it's clear as day that people pick and choose based on their potential earnings. It's clear. We can call it out for what it is. And whether you agree or disagree with that, that's the fact of the matter. They're going to call out the low-hanging fruit that doesn't cost them money. But if it's going to cost them money, like in China, then we're not going to discuss that one. Akin to LeBron James telling Daryl Morey that he should better educate himself about what's going on in China. It's like, hang on a second, what are you talking about? It's clear what's going on in Hong Kong and China. So money talks, bullshit walks. Yeah,
and you're effectively talking there about Daryl Morey, who was the general manager of the Houston Rockets. He tweeted something in support of Hong Kong, and the league quickly shut him down. And like you said, LBJ basically said he wasn't informed about the situation at hand. Meanwhile, LeBron James is known for supporting, social causes and being an activist in the United States when it comes to movements like Black Lives Matter and everything else. But as soon as the shoe was on the other foot and Hong Kong became the topic, that social activism kind of all went out the window.
Oh, he's a face of Nike. So, you would have a call from the NBA, you would have a call from Nike to either not comment or actually counter-argument Daryl Morey and give some support, because it's going to cost him money at the end of the day if China starts pulling money out of the NBA. And it's clear as day. It's just, let's call it for what it is. I just don't understand why people are so tippy-toeing around this. It's clear as day why it's not done. And like I said, if you're going to put your toe in the water about social causes, the excuse of, I only know what's going on in my own country, I don't buy that, because it only takes you 5 minutes to jump online, read a book, and figure out what's going on. You should be held accountable for using your voice then for all human rights violations, not just ones that are, for your own community or something that's, I guess, closer to you that doesn't cost you money. You should, and LeBron could have said, I don't know the specifics of the situation, but if what's true, that's despicable. Simple as that. But he couldn't even do that because it was going to cost him money.
Yeah, well, that would have been a much more honest take. And speaking of using your voice to fight for common good, you've been doing that over the past 18 months or so. Obviously, we've all been locked up with this pandemic, and that's given us a bit more free time to cruise Twitter and whatnot. And you've been quite outspoken about the lockdowns here in Victoria. I mean, what were some of your main criticisms of the lockdowns and how that was handled?
Oh, where do you start? I mean, first of all, I'd much rather not be talking about it. The fact that I'm still talking about it means that we're still in a shit show. But it just didn't make sense to me. It just, a lot of it, at the start of this all, people forget I was part of the Sydney Kings when we were in the middle of a grand final series. And we're down 2-1, supposed to fly back to Perth for game 4. And we pulled the plug because right when this thing went bang, because we didn't know the ramifications of it. At that point, we were hearing that even if you catch COVID, you're going to have your lung capacity and effects to your breathing is going to be for life. We didn't really know the extent of what it does short, medium, long term. So I guess at that point, I somewhat didn't disagree with the lockdowns in April of 20 because no one knew. I've never been through this in my life. So I was like, it kind of makes sense. Let's kind of shut down for a little bit, 2 weeks to stop the spread. But it just kept going and going and going. And then it was like open, close. And then once you start talking to people that the ramifications of what lockdowns were doing to protect from a virus, there was so many more problems it was causing. So, kids being schooled in front of a computer screen for 10 hours a day. It was, elderly missing yearly medical screenings or 6 monthly medical screenings. So then all of a sudden they finally get in 2 years later. Oh, damn, Jim, like if you would have caught that little lump 2 years ago, you'd probably live longer. You probably got a year to live. The mental pressure, people losing businesses, people not being able to work, people being, I'm blessed to be in a nice big house, right? Imagine being in a 2-bedroom unit with 2 kids being told, okay, do the homeschooling and do your 10 hours of work a day. It's impossible. So for a government, especially in Victoria, that was pushing mental health, we've got to, really talk about this out in the open and blah, 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 blah. That was all of a sudden put on the back burners for everything's virus. And like I said early on, I didn't disagree with it. But as time went on, I was like, there's so many more ramifications of this than we can ever believe. And that's why I've been against it. I think, no one was talking about suicides. No one was talking about mental health. No one was talking about domestic violence. No one was talking about predatory behavior for kids that were in hostile homes with parents or step parents that weren't treating them well, sexual abuse, all these things not spoken about at all. And that's why I started to fire up, because I was like, this is just wrong. And I knew, if I was 16-year-old Andrew Bogut or 8-year-old Andrew Bogut living with my father, and his business is deemed, hey mate, you're not essential. No one's on the road right now driving, really. So you just stay home. Like, we wouldn't be able to eat. And you're just like, you're telling everyday people they can't go to work. I guess what really got me was when landscapers in Victoria, people that mow lawns, weren't deemed essential. And I was like, if there's one job that's old Jim's mowing, rocks up to your house by himself on a lawnmower to mow your lawn, and then sends you a bill via email, if there's one job that is stop you catching the virus at all costs, it's mowing someone's lawn. Once they cut that, I was like, nah, this has become clearly political, and that's why I've been outspoken about it.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And, I agree. It was very one-dimensional. It was all focused on top-line case numbers at the expense of deaths, hospitalizations, mental health, business closures, job security, childhood development, all that sort of stuff kind of just did not warrant a mention in the media or from the political bigwigs. And one thing I kind of took out of what you just said there is, if you're affluent, if you've got a lot of money, you could probably deal with it much better than people, say, from poorer socioeconomic classes. And there's actually a book coming out from Rob Henderson, who's an academic at Yale, and it's called Luxury Beliefs. And he says that, affluent classes, they can have these luxury beliefs like defund the police or destroy the nuclear family or, let's end monogamy, because it doesn't really affect them. But if I live in, say, a poorer socioeconomic class or area, chances are I'm dealing with a lot of crime. And when you look at a lot of the statistics on defund the police, people in the inner city, they don't want to defund the police. The majority don't want that because that directly affects them. But if I live in a safe community, then sure, I can say this because it makes me feel morally righteous that I'm saying something that makes me feel better about myself. And similar with the lockdowns here, if I live in an affluent part of town, just me and my partner, I can go and get my lattes, I can work from home for 8 hours a day, I haven't got kids. It's much easier for me to deal with it than the situation that you described. So it seems to me that there's this just lack of empathy and understanding for other people's unique circumstances.
Yeah, that's the whole thing. It just boggles my mind. And generally, these people that are pushing lockdowns on the other side are all about equality and protect the minority, and we need to give them a foot up so they can succeed in society, especially if they're refugees or immigrants. But then on this side of the ball, they're like, no, lockdown. It's like, oh, if I can do my Zoom call, why can't you? It's like, well, I'm a concreter. How the fuck am I going to concrete someone's house via Zoom? How am I going to mow someone's lawn via Zoom? Like, and that's just the disparity between the elite and everyday working people is just growing more and more. And those people don't have a voice, you know, like, yeah, it's easy to do your Zoom calls and have a wine at 12 o'clock at home with your fridge full of beer or alcohol, like people that, you know, like I do, you know, we're not wanting. That's very, very easy. But for someone who's got a mortgage, I mean, banks haven't cut mortgage rates. I mean, banks haven't stopped mortgage payments.
Yeah.
We'll defer for a couple of months maybe, but it's still going to be at the end of your loan, you're still going to be able to pay it back. The other thing that people have missed is I read a study, I don't have a citation, but it's very easy to jump online and find it. The IQ points of kids in the last 2 years has significantly dropped. Young kids, yeah. So primary school age kids, and it's all accessible online. That you know, they put it down to, you know, learning off computer. They put it down to even the face masks for states and countries that have made young kids, 5-6-year-olds wear masks. A lot of those kids, their social interaction and even their way of being is responding to facial expressions. So, you know, a kid takes, you know, Sophie's toy, they know that it's bad or good based on her facial expressions, right? Now they don't see the facial expressions. So now that, and it's noted that the IQ points have gone down on children, and it's just like, nah, that's all right. Don't worry about that. It's all about case numbers. It's like, okay, you know, and then, you know, dying from COVID, dying with COVID, then it's gone case numbers. Okay, how many of those are in hospital? Oh, well, it's a lot. It's this number. How many had health issues? How many of those? Oh, a fair bit of them. We're not going to mention that today because it's too many. Like, you know, and that's been my thing. Protect the vulnerable and the elderly. I totally get it. Nursing homes, hospitals, protect those areas.
100%.
But when you get to a point where you're locking down a perfectly healthy male or female 30-year-old for 20 odd months, just doesn't make sense. So my whole thing was like, you know, protect the elderly, nursing homes, hospitals, people that have health issues are strongly advised to stay home as much as they can during this. And then it's a matter of everyone else getting back to normal. But as soon as you even discuss that, it's like, you want to kill grandma, you want to do, it's just like, you can't have a sensible conversation around this. Even with academics, like having someone that's pro-lockdown, anti-lockdown, and someone who's in the middle moderating. Why can't we get that on TV to hear both sides of the argument? We don't hear any of that. All we hear is what our premiers are dictating to us in whatever state you're in. And that's been the most disappointing thing. The open dialogue with all of this, deemed by one side of the experts, has just been shoved down our throat.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And, you know, you mentioned that study that, you know, IQ points have been dropping amongst kids. There's another study published in Nature, which is perhaps the world's most, you know, prominent academic journal, which found that the lockdowns and distance learning actually increases the social class achievement gap. So kids from wealthier families can get through that okay, but kids from poorer families can't, like we alluded to earlier. And so, you know, studies have been performed on this, and they're finding that the gap between the haves and the have-nots in terms of kids is only going to get bigger and bigger. And, you know, I see it with, you know, my nephews who play soccer. You know, they're about 16 and 18 respectively. They basically lost out on 2 years of development. You know, obviously Europe's opened up, they're playing competitive games, but if you've lost 2 years in the mid to late teens, that's going to be a huge impediment on your chances of making any sort of professional level. And that's obviously, you know, yeah, sport, fantastic, but that transfers over into everything, academics, even social development, everything else. And that's something that wasn't spoken about. And nor was the fact that, hey, get some vitamin D, go and exercise, sleep well. No, it just wasn't part of the conversation.
Yeah, a few points. So I've made that very point that you just made. No one's talking about aspiring professional athlete or aspiring professional whatever. A 14 to 16, 17 is the most optimal time they have to make that step from a semi-professional to professional.
Yep.
In Victoria, they haven't played for 2 years. Haven't played a game of basketball, soccer, tennis, whatever it is. So those athletes now, their dream's probably tattered. You go back to the point of living healthy and all that kind of stuff. And I've mentioned this in numerous different forums. I've not heard one premier, prime minister, president get on a podium and say, this is what you do if you catch coronavirus, besides run to the hospital. You know, we talk about this whole thing with the vaccinated, unvaccinated. The methodology now is well, the unvaccinated are going to back up the hospital system, right? Well, you know who else is going to back up the hospital system? People that catch COVID and watch these press conferences and shit themselves with the fear porn. What are they going to do? They're going to run to the hospital, right? Yeah. So why aren't we told on a daily basis or weekly basis, hey, if you catch COVID and you're 35 years old, you're 40, you're 18, don't panic. You're in a very low risk category, 0.00, whatever percent it is. These are the things you should do, very similar to a flu, whatever it is. Okay, we want you to stay home, stay off your feet, don't lift your heart rate up, so don't do any strenuous activity for a week, drink a lot of water, maybe take some multivitamins, vitamin D, zinc, whatever. Get out in the sun, make sure your mental health's okay. We hear none of that. Not one prime minister, president, premier has said that.
Yeah.
It's just get the vaccine and you'll be safe. Well, yeah, it's great to get the vaccine, but if I'm eating KFC 3 times a day and watching Netflix all day, the vaccine is not going to really help me that much. Like at the end of the day, like I'm unhealthy as it is. So I don't know why we're not promoting people to be healthy and doing the right thing. And then on the flip side, what do we do if we catch COVID?
Yeah, 100%. And it's. I mean, I came across another study. It was based on a sample size of several thousand patients. That looked at vitamin D deficiency, and it found that 80% of the hospitalized patients in this part of the world were all deficient in vitamin D, which is, a simple thing, pop some pills, go outside, get some sun. But again, something we just absolutely did not hear from anyone in a position of power or influence.
Especially when you're locked in your house for 20 months.
Yeah.
And on top of that, you're living in Victoria, let's say, that even if you are outside, there's not a lot of vitamin D to be had in the winter. Get a bit of glare every now and then on you. But yeah, let's lock everyone inside, diminish their vitamin D. Or give them an hour a day, if that. I mean, it just did not make sense. Especially when they put the exercise limits onto 1 hour a day. Honestly, if I'm at home in lockdown and I want to run around my block for 20 hours a day and interact with no one, how is that a thing? Now, most people weren't abiding by it because who's going to time it? But I had a mate that he has a newborn baby and he has a dog, right? So what he would do, the dog's a massive dog, so he couldn't walk them together. So he'd take the newborn in the stroller, walk around the block, come home, pass baby on to the wife, then take the dog for a quick walk. I had a neighbor like, hey, you've gone for your one walk today. It's like, what? And that's the other thing that people don't discuss is the divide in the community now of people dogging on each other. No one's being neighborly, no one's understanding, and that's probably the most disappointing thing is the people you're living amongst are the Stasi. They're the police. They're the ones that are dobbing you in. They're doing the cop's job for them. Yeah. And that, whether you agree with that or not, because there'll be a lot of bedwetters that say, oh, you shouldn't be breaking the rules anyway. You're at an hour and a half instead of an hour. That's not going to be a nice civil society to live in for the next decade. It's going to cause a lot more problems than people realize.
No, you're absolutely right. I actually went for a run down the Yarra a couple of days ago, and I saw some graffiti on, I think it was Swan Street Bridge or whatever the case was. And it said, punch an anti-vax fascist today. And that just speaks volumes about this sort of radicalization of this virus and, just a polarization between left and right and everything else. And it's not going to be a very pleasant place to be, but I've got some ideas on this. I think part of this has to do with the fact that people lack meaning and community, and to them, belonging to something is more important than being right and just signaling that I'm part of this team A, we're the best, we want to win. And that's why we're just not having these conversations, because whatever team B says, no, that must be wrong. They're the other, and therefore I'm not even going to entertain that for a second.
100%. It's political parties have become the religion, and that's really, really concerning. People that, generally don't, if you don't like religion for whatever reason, that's your right. But then those same people are generally all in religious fanatics of their political team. If you follow politics and you have, you're all in with one party and they do something absolutely, despicable and you can't call them out, you're brainwashed. Simple as you're indoctrinated. And that's what we're seeing. We're like, and it's on both sides. Don't get me wrong. It's on.
It is.
You got Labor people that like Daniel Andrews' corruption just continues to get aired out. But liberals. Then you got liberals that, Tim Smith drunk drives, and then it's like, Catherine Dan Andrews, that whole debacle, who was potentially drunk driving, allegedly, which was never breath tested and whatever. So it's on both sides, and it's like, if you can't actually factor in that, hey, your party's done something despicable, if you can't call it out, you're indoctrinated. And that's what we're seeing, the majority. It's like, my team's always right. They never do anything wrong. And it's just creating so much division in our society. And, especially when it comes down to medical and vaccines and all that, I'm openly pro-choice. I think it's, like I said, if you're going to start mandating these kinds of things, well, arguably you should mandate exercise. You should mandate that, you shouldn't take away McDonald's, KFC every other second meal. We should mandate that you shouldn't watch 18 hours of Netflix a day. You should mandate, the list goes on and on and on and on and on, right? So that's why I believe this is a slippery slope. And, I don't know if you saw the article out of Queensland, but there's rumors going up from, I think up in Cairns or somewhere. They're talking about, well, if you're unvaccinated and you go to hospital, you potentially won't get a bed. If there's a vaccinated person, that's a slippery slope. And people don't understand what I'm trying to get at with that. Well, why isn't it? They didn't take the vaccination. They're at risk. They shouldn't get a bed. Okay, let's do drug abuse. Let's do alcoholism. Let's do smokers. Let's do people that just eat junk food. Let's do people that don't exercise. How long do you want to draw that bow? Because arguably they're putting a strain on the health system the same way anyone else is, or an unvaccinated person is, but they don't get the hypocrisy and all that. It's a choice to get vaccinated. It's not that hard. Well, it's also a choice not to put shitty food in your mouth and give yourself heart disease. So it's a very slippery slope if we start going down that path, in my opinion.
Yeah, for sure. And I think what we're just seeing is just a hell of a lot of intolerance. And I think I wrote an article about 6 months ago, something along the lines of Andrew Bogut and the political intolerance of the left. And this was just in response to people not being able to differentiate Andrew Bogut, the commentator, from Andrew Bogut, the political commentator on Twitter. Like, they might not like your view on something on Twitter, and therefore suddenly you commentating an Australian men's basketball game is the worst thing in the world. I've actually got some of the tweets here. I'm disgusted that I have to watch the Boomers game in standard def. No, not this one. How much better is Australian men's basketball without Bogut playing? And ridiculous statements like that. Or zero tolerance for Bogut, 7+ it is, which, is all just coming from the fact that you've got these views that are, anti-lockdown rather, and they just can't, separate the two things. And it's just very partisan, and it's very, very, very polarized, and it's difficult. But on that topic, obviously you've got a lot of haters on Twitter, a hell of a lot of haters on Twitter. How do you deal with them?
Well, funnily enough, I have more lovers. They're a minority. They usually have 15 or 20 different accounts under the one user. What's funny is I correlate it by when I'm out in public and when I'm amongst everyday people. And I've never had one person to this day come up to me and echo similar to what I'm tweeted by haters. Not once. Right? On the flip side, I have so many people coming up to me saying, look, I don't always agree with what you say, but I appreciate that you're outspoken and you stand up for what you believe in. I have a lot of other people that are like, look, I'm one of those people that you're standing up for. I appreciate it. Even just saying hello, fam, whatever it is, right? They're very vocal. So, that leads me to believe it is a fringe minority on Twitter. You feel like that sometimes they pile on. Look, just last week they went through a cancel Bogut ceremony. I was trending Sack Bogut, hashtag Sack Bogut was trending because I made a joke about Fiona Patton being a self-proclaimed, wrote in her own book that she was a prostitute, a joke about that, and she has sold out Victorians again, by the way, so we're right. And that it was misogynist and this and that and that and this, and it's like, no, it wasn't. It definitely wasn't. And that was a campaign where they were emailing my sponsors, people I work with, why do you have this guy involved with you? And half the emails came back to me with a LOL emoji from those very people that I work with. And it is what it is. Like, it's people are quick to label, and it's like, okay, you might have made a great play on the basketball court and made a dunk, but I still hate you because of this. It's just like, well, what are we doing here? If you can't separate the two, and that's the thing. It's like, I disagree with everything he says because he once said this. It's like, okay. And it goes akin to exactly what I said about politics. It's like, my team is never wrong. That team's always right. Or what about this? What about that? What about this? And you can't help those people, but they are a minority, a fringe minority of lunatics, in my opinion. They mobilize well online. They've got a shitload of accounts and bots and all that kind of shit. But once I get out in public, I don't. All I hear is birds chirping from that end. I don't hear from any of them. And I'd love for them to actually come up and have a conversation and a debate. And what's funny is a real small percentage that I have ran into publicly that might echo more towards the like, we don't like your views. I have a conversation with them and they're like, oh, like, actually, yeah, like, he's all right. Like, you know what I mean? And when you put it on Twitter in text, it's
280 characters.
Yeah, but it's read through their brain. So they're creating the context in their mind. To be honest with you, half the time, I'm taking the piss with 90% of my tweets are stupidly sarcastic and taking the piss. And people have no idea. They think everything's dead serious. And I'm like, I'm not going to explain sarcasm to people and start saying, look, this was a joke here. Don't take that seriously. This is sarcasm. That's for them to figure out. But my meter is the public, and when I'm out in public, and I've got no real gripes going out every day and living my life.
Yep. Fantastic. And, one thing that I know you do, if someone is just, getting on your nerves on Twitter, you'll block them. And of course, people on the left will say, oh, he hasn't got thick skin, he blocks people. But to your point earlier, let's talk about people, not working out, eating junk food, consuming all sorts of stuff that's not good for them. One thing that people don't talk about is what we consume, with our minds. Of course, I'm going to block someone if they're just going to pollute my mental real estate. They can't live rent free in my brain, because that's important. And that's something that's worth, being really vigilant about, because why should I let this person just pollute my brain with their nonsensical rants?
Yeah, well, I draw the line at like heavy abuse, or when they're clearly trolling or trying to, create a pile-on campaign. I just block them because I just can't be bothered for the most part. And they're the ones like, oh, where's my freedom of speech? I was like, yeah, well, the other ones that make me laugh is someone will come and abuse me in an abusive tweet. They'll make fun of me, I don't know, whatever it is, right? And I'll retweet it and make a pun back at them about their profile. And then I have people saying, oh, look at this guy, he's insensitive. I'm like, well, you want to go at me and talk shit about me? Fine. Every now and then I'm going to come back. And that's frowned upon though, because I'm a person with the following. And
you're punching down.
I'm punching down. Well, don't punch up in the first place, dickhead. Like that's how that goes. Like, and that's what, most athletes, celebrities won't do because they're scared of the backlash. Well, it's like, well, if I'm going to have some banterish back and forth, pun for pun if you want. I'm happy to do that. And I think I've got a pretty decent sense of humor to do that. And that's where it gets muddied, right? But for the most part, if it's like abusive, I get death threats, I get threats against family members and stuff about whatever. Most of the time I block those people, but they're the ones that are allowed to continue to run accounts. But if you say something that's against the narrative of lockdown or narrative of whatever, your account gets severely shadow banned, which I'm experiencing right now on Instagram. Funnily enough, they're heavily monitoring my account. Someone probably with a blue-haired Bart Simpson haircut somewhere in the Instagram offices is severely throttling and kind of deleting a lot of things I post on there.
Yeah, no, it's something a lot of people I know are dealing with on Instagram in particular. But I guess if nothing else, you're in good company. I mean, they tried to cancel Dave Chappelle last week as well, so you're not alone in that. But we might move on from politics just in the interest of time. We're almost out of time. But I wanted to get your take on something when it comes to parenthood. So Shaquille O'Neal last week, Bogues, I'm not sure if you saw this. He basically said, "We ain't rich, I'm rich. I want my kids to earn their own money." Now, of course, you came from, humble working class background, but you went off to earn about $120 million US throughout your career in the NBA. How do you go about instilling that same hunger in your kids, given that you guys already have so much, or given that you already have so much?
Well, yeah, it's uncharted waters for me. I've never had to go through it. So we're going through it right now. Funnily enough, my son, was his birthday the other day, and he's starting to ask questions about money. Like, how do you get your money? Why do we have a nice house? Like all that kind of stuff. And, he's actually said, can we have a yard sale so I can make some money? Just like he's starting to realize that money's an important part of society, unfortunately, whether that's good or bad. But yeah, it is tough. It's something I rack my brain around a lot. I like Shaq's mantra that, you're going to have to, you're not just going to get it. You're going to have to work for it. You're going to have to build your own life. Look, if they're in helter-skelter need where they make a mistake in life or something happens where they need help, I've got no issue doing that. But I feel like if I'm feeding the beast whenever they're in trouble or something bad happens, it's going to set a bad precedent for their life and their personal development. So they're going to have to figure their own way around it. I'll never be wanting as far as bare essentials and needs. But for the most part, they're going to have to go through some tough times to realize. I'm not against them getting a job at a McDonald's or a local fish and chip shop or all kind of stuff. I think they're very important lessons, and I'm not against them doing that. I'm actually for it. I'd push them to go and work a normal job as a 16, 17-year-old whilst juggling school and sport and having a busy schedule. I think overrunning kids to an extent has its positives because they need to balance their time, appreciate what they've got. They make their first $100 and they buy something nice. They appreciate that item so much more. So I agree with Shaq to an extent, and I think it's a tough balance that I rack my brain. It's kind of a stress that I have is the best way of handling it. Whereas, the wife is like getting everything they want and need and more. I'm kind of like trying to pump the tires at times.
Yeah, no, and that makes sense. And I'm sure it will be something that you'll kind of figure out over time. We might wrap up with a quick lightning round, Bogues, just a few quick questions, quick responses. Number one, what are your top three favorite cars in your car collection?
Top three, okay. VR Walkinshaw, all original.
Nice.
The plastic pig, as they call them. What else? I got a VK Holden Commodore HET VK Brock Blue Mini. Both are immaculate, low kilometers, both under 10,000 kilometers, I believe, from new. Those two. And then I'd have to say they're all going to be Holdens, unfortunately. So sorry, Ford fans, but W1 HSV. So that's the GTSR, which was the last big banger they made in 2017 before they shut up shop here in Australia. That car is an absolute menace to drive. Very, very fun car. It's got 76 on it from factory. So those three are really, and just the condition they're in. I mean, the W1 has 1,000 kilometers on it. The other two have under 10,000. Just immaculate original cars from new.
Yeah, fantastic. Quick follow-up question. Where are they parked?
Like the secret location.
Fair enough, mate. Second question. Favorite Croatian food?
Oh, favorite Croatian food. I mean, I love my budek.
Beef budek or?
No, more of a cheese.
Yeah.
More of a cheese budek guy. Cevapi, obviously, everyone loves Cevapi. Who doesn't? But yeah, I think there's a bunch of different things. Depends what you feel like, but probably my number one favorite would be Noklice or semolina dumplings in like a chicken broth soup. It's something my grandma always made for me when I was really young. Recipe's really easy. It's basically just semolina, egg, olive oil, mush it up, chuck it in a broth, and you got dumplings. So that's probably my favorite food. It's probably a comfort food that just brought me back to childhood memories. And that's something that I love to this day.
Beautiful. And lucky last question. If you had to pick a starting five former Yugoslavian team based on today's NBA players, who would it be? Who'd make the lineup?
Oh, wow. That's tough.
Putting you on the spot here.
Drazen, obviously.
Yep. I'll say you're doing all time. Let's go all time.
What did you say?
I was asking for current players.
I can do current players. I'll probably miss a few. You got Jokic.
Yep.
At the 5. What else do they have? Bogdanovic. Probably both Bogdanovic's would be Serb and Crow.
Yep.
Need another 4-man. Yeah. Point and 4. That's what I'm struggling with.
What about Luka?
Oh, Slovenia, yeah. So count them. They were only in the war for a day. I don't know if we count them. But yeah, Luka at the 1 for sure, no doubt. Both Bogdanovic's, Jokic the 5.
You need a point guard, mate.
Well, I put Luka at the 1.
Put him on, yep.
Yeah, he can distribute and score. And then my 4-man, you got what you got? Sadic, you got trying to find another 4. Bjelica's in there somewhere. Probably Sadic, probably Bjelica combo. Yep. Those two guys currently today. But yeah, I mean, if it was still together as it once was, man, I mean, it'd be
solid team.
A really, really tough team considering how Slovenia went at the Olympics with one superstar player. You factor in with Jokic and the rest of the guys, it'd be pretty tough.
Oh yeah, I mean, you've also got Goran Dragic, Nikola Vucevic, who else? Ivica Zubac. There's quite a few players in there.
They'd all back up.
Yeah,
things would back up Jokic, in my opinion. Vucevic, I love his game. Zubac as well, but Jokic you can't go against. It's just that 4-man. Dragic, I think, is a bit old right now. As of today, I probably wouldn't put him in the team. Maybe as a fringe backup, but my 5 would be pretty close to what I said.
Fantastic. Well, I think with that, we'll probably bring this episode to a close. Bogues, thank you so much for your time today, and also just take a moment to just congratulate you on your success, and also thanks for just being a voice for people who don't necessarily have one, particularly over the past 18 months.
No worries, man. Thanks for having me.
It's a pleasure. All right.